Hello and welcome to this interview in the summit that is all about empowering a league of extraordinary mothers on laying a strong foundation for health and happiness in their teenage girls. My name is Edwina Murphy-Droomer and today's interview is with Dr. Damian Kristof. Damian is a nutritionist, naturopath, chiropractor, and is a highly sought after presenter and speaker in the wellness industry. With over 20 years of experience, Damian's in-depth knowledge of the body, nervous system, food, functions and responses, coupled with his friendly and dynamic presenting style, has him in high demand. Focusing on food is the key to unlocking optimal health. Damian has the knack of being able to communicate the complexities of health in a manner that makes it simple to understand. He's well known for his dulcet tones, humour and pearls of wisdom on Triple M Radio, the Wellness Guys podcast, and was the diet expert on the TV show Downsize Me. Welcome, Damian, and thank you so much for being part of this series.
Thank you, Edwina. It's really an honour to be here and part of this, and hopefully what we get to share today helps hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of, mums and daughters. It'd be great.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. Having heard you speak many times on stage, I'm really, really looking forward to this interview. And I'm going to ask you today to focus on stress a little bit. If we can talk about cracking that stress code, particularly for our girls that are, moving into high school, presents a whole new levels of stress, and then moving up in the higher levels into VCE. It's a really, really challenging time for our girls from all sorts of different perspectives, and for the mums that are helping our girls move through this. So if we can, we'll get into all the things that we can do to help down the track a little bit. If we can start with recognizing the signs of stress and what to look for, I think that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, sure. I'm really happy to do that, and we'll take everyone through that. I was just, as you were talking, thinking, well, why don't we, I suppose, define what stress is, because it's a word that gets thrown around. A lot of people think it's just emotional, but there's many layers of stress, and there's, I suppose, three recognizable types of stress that we can experience. There's the emotional stress, which we're all familiar with, and that can be from relationships, that can become from interactions or schoolwork or other things like jobs, etc. But there's also chemical stress, which a lot of us, go through. So chemical stress could be anything that we take or put on our body or put into our body. So those stressors can have a significant impact on the health of the body, particularly if they're left untended. And we know that, there's a lot of chemicals that mimic biological functions within the body. We know that there's chemicals that mimic estrogen, and particularly for women and girls and developing girls. Some of these chemicals can be disastrous long term. So it's good to be considerate of that too. Yeah. And then the other stresses, which is, I think, probably becoming epidemic in terms of the size of its proportion, is the postural stress. And so if we look at physical stress, the first physical stress we ever encounter is the birth process. But then it just continues to go on from there. So if we look at kids these days with text neck, if we look at kids, the way in which they slouch with their backpacks, my son is doing year 12 at the moment, and his backpack, I reckon, could weigh up to 25 kilograms sometimes. It's just ridiculous. And he's been carrying a backpack for a lot of years. And it's probably only now that he's reached, an adult sort of size that he can handle that sort of weight. He's 6'3" and weighs 70 something kilograms. And so he's still got time to fill out. He's probably going to get to about 80 something kilograms. But, it's only now that he really should be or could be carrying a bag of that weight, but they've been doing it for such a long time. So there's postural distortion, there's chemical stress, and then there's emotional stress. And they all affect the body in a very similar way. And so it's very good to, acknowledge that, and it affects the health of the body similarly, but with different disease outcomes. So it's good to be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That paints a much bigger picture. So, I imagine if they're all affecting the body in very similar ways, then I guess the ways that we address it are fairly similar as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this concept known as neuroplasticity that the body deals with and does every single day. And the more malleable we are and the more plastic we are, the easier it is for us to be able to deal with stuff. But if we have repeated trauma or repeated emotion, I'm sure through some of the other speakers and guests that you've had on this series, that you would have come across the concept of, repeated stress, impacting and building upon stuff, and it kind of winds up. Stress winds up. It's not just that stress goes from 0 to 100, though it feels like it. We actually wind up into an adaptive state of stress. And so the body's been designed with a complex kind of repertoire of machinery, bits and pieces, parts that help us manage our environment and help us deal with stress, and helps us move back into a state of flow. They used to call that homeostasis, but the body's never really in balance. It's just kind of ebbing and flowing and just, dealing with the environment at all points. It's never just kind of calm. It would be nice to think that there'd be calm waters, but there's never ever any calm in the body.
Yeah.
And I reckon even the Dalai Lama would agree with that, or Mother Teresa, I'm sure she had times in her life where she was stressed out of her brain and times in her life where she probably felt more at peace. Yeah. But what's interesting about that is that because of this level of adaptation our body goes through, we adapt to our environment. Now, if our environment continues to project stress, or it is stressful, or our posture's bad for a long period of time, then our body adapts to that level of stress. And so our new stress set point, where it was, say, 0 at the start of the day, gets to, say, level 1 by the end of the day. But then the next day, our new 0 point was where 1 left off the day before. And so every single day we wind up our stress, and it takes time to unwind it. And a lot of what we'll talk about today, you and I, Edwina, will be about how to recognize where you are in your stress cycle and how do you get out of that stress cycle. That's kind of, I suppose, cracking your stress code. It's understanding that stress is affecting your DNA. Stress actually triggers the body to respond in different ways. And the way in which you respond is somewhat programmed by your lifestyle, but also your DNA. So you want to try and unravel that and take the load off. Yeah. So that's important.
Yeah. It just makes me, we were talking before we sort of hit record about our kids that are in VCE this year. Yeah. And the workload that they put on them over the Christmas holidays, and then every holidays they seem to have all this workload. They just don't give them that chance to turn off. I just feel like they just don't turn off for about 2 years. It's such a huge pressure. So I think, as parents, part of our job in this is actually getting them to stop, not, prodding them to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And it's good for us to recognize where our kids are in stress. And so let's start off with the concept of what stress really is. Stress is a response to the environment that kind of means that we care enough to have a reaction. So there's 2 types of neurological stress responses that we can have. We can have a sympathetic stress response, and that sympathetic stress response is often known as fight or flight, but there's kind of another level of that, which is fight or flight or freeze. And that's all part of what's called a sympathetic response. It's a natural thing to have. We're meant to do that. It means that we care. It means that we're mindful of what's in our environment and in our surroundings. So you want to be able to have a fight or flight freeze response. If you can't have that response, then you're probably going to be in a bit of danger. So you want to have it. The other response that you can have is a parasympathetic response. And the parasympathetic response is that of repair, rest, and digest. And it allows us to, go to sleep, repair our body, digest our food. And it's interesting because we often get told, don't go to, bed with food in your tummy because it's hard for your body. Essentially, you'll do a lot of digestion, a lot of repair while you're sleeping anyway, because that's the part of the nervous system that kicks in. And there's cultures around the world that after a meal will go and have a sleep. Because that's, that part of the nervous system. So that parasympathetic part
we're doing a bit of myth busting on this summit, and that's one that I certainly haven't heard before. I always, make sure that we eat dinner early so that you're not, just full of food as you get into bed. So that's an interesting one.
It is interesting, and look, there's many people would respond differently, but and I think most people would agree. They probably wake up fresher in the morning if they don't go to bed with a tummy full of food. But the way in which the nervous system's geared, it's actually okay. Your body will do fine if you go to bed after you've eaten a big meal. I mean, there's so many times I'm sure that people have just fallen asleep on the couch after a big feed, like on Christmas Day. You just eat way too much and then you just have to shut down and go to sleep. That's a
food coma.
Food coma, totally. Carb coma. That's right. But it's very much a parasympathetic nervous system response, and the body's geared to do that. It's meant to do that. So we don't want to be in fight or flight and then trying to digest. The last thing that we want to be doing is running away from danger, and then hanging on to all the food that we've just eaten. So the natural response of the body is when we do go into fight or flight or freeze, we dump everything. Like everything comes out. So big fright, big scare, big adrenal surge of adrenaline will release everything in our gut. So if you've ever had a coffee, you will find that about 10 minutes after you've had your caffeinated beverage, you've got to go and do number two. So you've got to go and do a poo. And that's a normal physiological response. Your body wants to get rid of extra weight, stuff that you don't need anymore, and it tries to move it on. So if you didn't have that sympathetic response, you'd have to say that you've become a little bit maladaptive, or you've actually got to a point where you're a bit insensitive to a stressful event, and that's probably more of a concern. So stress starts at level 1, and then we kind of graduate after we've had enough of that care or enough concern to have a stress response. And we should be happy with stress. Stress basically means that we're alive, we're kicking, and we're aware of our environment. We should start to be, I suppose, concerned when we move into anxiety, when stress is difficult to manage. And so we move from a stress point where we care into an anxiety point where it feels like we're becoming a little bit overwhelmed. There's too much on our plate. We're not actually coping. We're starting to find ourselves not able to wind down easily at night, and everything seems to be just getting on top of us. That's the point where mums, you want to be more concerned about your daughters. It's at this point that you want to be going, okay, sweetheart, let's just check out here and just recognize that this is a second stage of stress, and we've got to go for a little walk. We've got to go and wind down. And it's about separating yourself from the tasks and moving out to do what's important, which is just walking around the block for about 30 minutes, shoulders back, sunglasses off. In the middle of the day is one of the best times to do it. So where there's sun, go outside, sunglasses off, and you'll feel much better. The body will do much better, and you'll switch your body into a more relaxed state. You'll just down-regulate that stress response. It doesn't mean you will stop caring. You'll just decrease the effect of stress so that you're now no longer in a state of anxiety. So
I know there's going to be mums listening to this going, what? Why sunglasses off? What's that?
It's an amazing thing. So the sun projects rays of light, and those rays of light are refracted in our eyes. And that refraction causes a little gland in the back of our brain, the midpoint of our brain, called the pineal gland, to secrete melatonin. And melatonin is essential to help us get to sleep. So you know that when you get anxious, over time, as your anxiety builds up, it becomes harder and harder and harder to fall asleep. And your melatonin levels have dropped. And so many times when people get to a state of insomnia, which is the third stage of stress, like if you move from stress into anxiety, then into insomnia, you've moved beyond anxiety and you're moving further down the rabbit hole of stress. It becomes more and more unmanageable, because if you don't have enough melatonin to put you into rest and relax and digest and repair, everything else starts to go wrong. This is where we start to get significant hormone disruption. So we get hormone disruption from sleep hormones, happiness hormones. So when you sleep a lot, you wake up happier. If you don't sleep enough, you wake up grumpy. We'll talk about that in a moment in the next phase of stress. But that'll affect the whole hypothalamic pituitary adrenal gland axis, where we've got thyroid interaction, hypothalamus interaction, adrenal gland dysfunction, and then ultimately that can affect reproductive cycles and estrogen, progesterone, testosterone production. So it's very important to make sure that we're managing these stages of stress and where we actually are in our stress response. Yeah. And so the next part, when you don't sleep, you wake up flat, and that's not great. So as a result of not having enough melatonin, you don't sleep really well, and you'll start to have a decrease or a decline in serotonin. You'll be laughing less, you'll have less happiness, and that depression kicks in. So that's the fourth stage of stress. And that's probably the most damaging and most destructive phase of stress, where the body's really had enough. You haven't listened to it. It's been calling out. You cared at one point. Now at depression, you don't care. So you've gone from caring a lot to caring too much and being anxious about it, to caring so much that you can't sleep, to then just not giving to, and then you're just going to, roll over. And so that depression is often medicated, and the only thing they do with medication is give you some more serotonin. You don't fix that whole wind up of stress. So where you started at 0 point, at stress point, and you wound up to a new 0 point with anxiety, and then you wound up with stress to a new 0 point with insomnia, you've now wound up to another stress point of depression, and that needs to be wound down. And you just can't take a drug to fix that. You've actually got to employ strategies to unwind all of that.
Yeah. I think if I can just, I know that these questions will be popping up, so if I can interrupt you as we go along.
Sure.
But with our teenage girls, how much sleep do they need to be getting at night?
It's a fascinating thing. It's difficult to say. However, 90-minute cycles are what's important. Yeah. So if they get to the point in their exam period or in their study period where they've got SACs or what are the others? GATS? I can't remember. CATS? Yeah, CATS. That's right. They've got all these little acronyms now in Victoria. I don't know what they've got in other countries and in other states, but essentially the pointy end of the year is probably where your kids are going to be more stressed or have the most amount of care and anxiety and potentially insomnia. It's unlikely that they'll go into depression unless they're absolutely just burnt out. But you can prevent that depression by getting them to exercise more, not sleep more. So it's watching funny movies, being entertained, laughing at the dinner table, telling, dad jokes are some of the best jokes in the world because, dads always find them funny. Parents or the kids will laugh at the dad because the dad's laughing. And it's a great thing. Like a good old dad joke is fantastic. And generally they're not offensive. And so, you're not really, sometimes they can be offensive, but generally they're not offensive. But a good dad joke and a good chuckle is a really great way just to lift the spirits and just, take the weight off. So Jackson got home last night really late. He had school swimming on, or APS swimming. So as the private schools had all their swimming on last night. So he went to that and, he came back all buzzy and all hyped up. He didn't get into about 11:15 last night. By the time he kind of wound down, went and had a shower, it was probably close to midnight. And then I had to try and get him to wake up this morning. So at about 6:30, I'm like, Jack, come on, mate, you got to get up. 7:15, he finally gets out of bed and he needs to be on the train by 7:15. And so he was a bit tired this morning. And so we realized that maybe he hasn't been getting enough sleep, or his sleep cycles haven't been in 90-minute cycles. And so you move from the peak of awakeness to the depths of your sleep in a 45-minute cycle. And it takes you 45 minutes to naturally come out of that. So it's a 90-minute cycle. So if you do the maths on that, are 90, 3, 4.5, 6, 7.5, 9. So many people try to get 8 hours of sleep, but that in fact puts you into another phase or downward phase of rest. And so unless you're breaking your sleep in the middle of the night and going to the bathroom, it's highly likely that when you wake up after 8 hours, you're probably going to be waking up mid-cycle of a downward sleep cycle. And you're moving further into REM sleep, which is, you don't really want to be woken up out of that. It's like a grumpy bear. Mm-hmm. And so 8 hours is not a good number. But from a sleep cycle perspective, it's done in 90-minute cycles. So 90 minutes, 3 hours, 4.5 hours, 6 hours, 7.5 hours. When you get to 9 hours, you're at the upper limit of sleep. You probably shouldn't need much more than that. If you need more than that, then there's other things going on. And that could be infection, low-grade infection. It could be exhaustion, but it shouldn't be for kids. 17, 18 years old, they should be exhausted.
That's it. We're going to just have to change the name of this to myth busting. 8 hours is that magic number that gets thrown out, isn't it? And it's
arbitrary. It's kind of like you need 2 liters of water. Or if you weighed 45 kilos and you drank 2 liters of water, you've essentially, you've basically, 3% of your body weight just in that whole day, just from drinking water. It's kind of not ideal. So you're better off. You're better off actually measuring out how much water you need to drink based on what the science would suggest, which is somewhere between 25 and 35 mils of water per kilogram of body weight. So, you know, even for the girls that are watching.
I'm just trying to remember, is it 1.6 times? Oh, I'm just trying to remember the formula.
Well, 0.025 times by your weight. That'll be it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yep. So, you know, if you're 100 kilos, you're drinking 2.5 to 3.5 litres of water a day, depending on the exercise or the outside ambient temperature. But in the middle of winter, you know, you're going to find yourself drinking 25 mils of water per kilogram of body weight. If you're 45 or 55 or 65 kilos, the maths is different for each of us, but it's 25 mils.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so if we perhaps start looking at some of the strategies, I think if we can, is it worth breaking it down into the, you know, the physical, emotional, chemical, or do we just look at overall strategies that really help across?
I think for the most part, I mean, at this point in time, we're probably looking at two types of stressors. If we're considering where we're at, or what we're discussing, which is mums and their teenage daughters, if we're considering that, then really the two things that we can really easily manage from a stress perspective with simple intervention are emotional stress and physical stress. The chemical stress is a little bit tricky, and you know that in itself will be probably an hour or two just of you and I talking.
Yeah, we've Therese Kerr is part of this summit, and we've looked at it. Yeah, so
Therese is gorgeous, and she's, you know, she talks all about, you know, how these chemicals are, you know, blocking and mimicking estrogens and hormones, and it's a big deal. Yeah, it's a really big deal. So particularly for hormone sensitive people. So it's not all people, because if it was all people, then all of us would be getting those diseases. But it's a good thing to be aware of, that chemicals can create stress in the body, and they do create stress in the body. So good to be aware of it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it is,
so from a physical,
I think it is particularly pertinent to women and girls as well, because we tend to like lots of lotions and potions and fragrance and, you know, all those lovely things. So yeah, it is a great interview to tune into, that one.
Yeah.
For this one, let's have a look at the emotional and physical.
Yeah. So it's interesting, and I love to teach teenagers and young kids when they come into my practice about posture.
Yep.
We all understand how important it is to breathe. And so one of the really simple things I like to be able to do and share with people is just to go into a texting posture, and I get them to get their phone out and just, you know, kind of get into the position of texting, and then try and take a big, deep breath.
Yep.
And just like check in to see how big and deep that breath actually is.
Yeah.
And I'll get them to breathe all that out and just return to normal breathing. And then I'll get them to sit up nice and straight, chest out, shoulders back, chin up, and then take a big deep breath in and see how that feels and how much more oxygen you get into your body. And then I talk about the impact of oxygen on the health of the brain. So really simple little thing to do. Just the act of breathing can shift you from a sympathetic dominant state into a parasympathetic appropriate response, which is a good thing to, you know, to do. So breathing's great. Wayne Todd, who invented a protocol called the SD protocol, the sympathetic dominant protocol, talks about stretching out the first ribs, the upper ribs, the rib cage. And so lying on a foam roller with your arms out like this, with a foam roller down your spine for about 10 minutes a day, and taking deep breaths into your belly, that's a really great way to switch on the parasympathetic nervous system response.
Yep.
Or move your body from sympathetic dominance over towards parasympathetic appropriate responses. So that's a good thing to do. But to know whether or not you're in sympathetic dominance or parasympathetic stages is good to be able to recognize. And so there's a few things. One of those things is to see where your tongue's actually sitting in your mouth. And I learned this from my great friend, Vicky Kelly. Vicky Kelly does a podcast called 1 Minute Mindfulness. I don't know if you've ever listened to Om, but 1 Minute Mindfulness is a wonderful podcast that Vicky's done. She's based in New Zealand, and she taught me this one little pearl. It's a ripper. And essentially, if your tongue's sitting down below behind your bottom row of teeth, if your tongue's down there, then you're in a parasympathetic state. If your tongue's stuck up against the roof of your mouth, then you're in a fight or flight or sympathetic state. And it's a good place to be when you're learning or listening. So I'd hope that when people are listening to this, their tongue's up, because that's where you're learning. Yeah. But when you want to rest, or you're needing to digest, or you need to go to sleep, then or repair, your tongue should be sitting below your bottom teeth. Now, a lot of people have really crooked bottom teeth, and it usually indicates that their tongue's stuck up against the top of their mouth, because the tongue actually shapes your bottom teeth. And so if you don't have your tongue pushed up against the bottom teeth, then the bottom part of your smile won't be tip top. So it's a good thing just to consider these sorts of things as well. So if your tongue's up there and it's up there and you're trying to get in a sympathetic dominant state, you're not going to get sleep very, very easily. So you want to focus on bringing your tongue down to below your teeth. 10 deep breaths. You could, starfish it if you like, and it's a really nice way to be. And just breathe, and you should fall asleep pretty quickly. But that's a great thing to do. I mentioned earlier on that if you went for a walk, so if anxiety was starting to kick in, you just check out, tools down, go outside. Boys will need to kick a football or throw some stones at something, or kick a cat. No, I'm joking. Don't kick a cat. Just they've got to get rid of some aggression, and then they'll go for a bit of a walk, and that'll be good.
Yeah.
Some girls will be the same, but most girls will probably respond better to a nice walk, sitting in a park, maybe some time to talk, and just download, have a cry. And that's a really nice little reset, moving then from anxiety back into stress where you care, but it's not bad. So you want to celebrate stress and be happy that you're in stress, as opposed to fearing stress and going, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. If you get to that point where you go, oh my gosh, it's just too much, that's actually anxiety. That's not stress.
It's too much. My daughter Zoe, who's in year 11, has a English sack this morning, and she was stressed last night. She was really worried about it. She got up this morning. She's like, Mum, can you just drive me to school? And in the back of my head, I just want to wrap her up and make everything better. And I was like, babe, I actually think you need to walk to school, because it's like 20 minutes. And I think it just gives her that chance to get her head out of, she can't have her head in the textbook or whatever. It just gives her a chance to kind of unwind before she gets to school. That's my theory anyway.
How did she respond to that? I know, right? It's that trade-off between, what's good for them and what they kind of want at the time. And so if it's going to build up more anxiety and then resentment and then set them into a cascade of stinking thinking, then sometimes it's just good to, okay, good, let's go for a little walk then now. 10 minutes, and then I'll drive you to school. And so if you've got that time, then that's great. Or why don't you go for a walk now for 10 minutes just to chill your brain out, and then I'll drive you to school. So you get that exercise in. So then you're achieving both things. She gets to walk to school with her sister, so she can, let off a bit of steam, and they can have a chat, and they're a bit of fresh air. Bit up the hate club. Exactly. And look, not everything has to be about compromises. It's really good. We talk about, often, I'm sure your mum would have said to you, back in my day, I used to walk 3 miles through the snow, the hail, everything, barefoot, back and forth from school, and you guys have got it easy these days. So we never really had compromise when I was growing up. There's a lot more compromise these days. So good on you if you're standing your ground. It was probably the best thing for her. But sometimes, they're in that such a wound up state. If she's taking a phone, like if she was walking and looking at her phone, then that'd be worse for her than actually, going for a walk without her phone and then being dropped off at school. Yeah. There's always so many little bits and things to consider, isn't there? It just doesn't, it's a fairly endless list of could, would, should, maybe. Yeah, totally. I'm a big fan of routine. I think that routine is just absolutely key with kids. And I think just maintaining routine, and the more we kind of interrupt those routines, I think the more it throws them out in one way or another. So that's another part of my thinking as well. Yeah, look, I think routine's actually good for everybody. To know what you're doing every single day is a great thing. And then if things come up or they prop up, then you just kind of adapt to it and you respond to it. But if you're in a state of adaptation and response every single day, and there's no order, that's a challenging thing for your nervous system for sure. That can create, obviously you'll build creativity out of that, and that's a great thing. Creative types, people who need order and structure through the day should run on order and structure. It's a good thing, and that's the bulk of humanity. There's a really important discussion to be had here in and around stress, and we know that movement actually decreases the effect of stress in the body. And movement does that through feed forward and feedback of what the brain's communicating through the body, and then what the body's communicating back to the brain. It happens all through the spinal cord, but it's all filtered through an area called the cerebellum. It's all controlled in through the cerebellum, which is the base of the spine, or the base of the skull, in the occipital region. And it's got lots of nerves that actually run out through to the neck. And so what we've learned, and there's some great researchers around the world that are looking into the ways in which chiropractic actually affects the nervous system to down-regulate stress. And there's a great commentator, his name is James Chestnut. I heard him talking many years ago about the link between movement and the occipital region, or the cerebellum. And he mentioned, and he spoke about this, that an adjustment has the effect of down-regulating the effect of stress in the body. So it doesn't necessarily switch off stress, but it helps the body deal better with stress. And it provides movement to the spine and the spinal cord that may not otherwise normally happen. And it helps to normalize the way in which the spine moves. So a lot of people pigeonhole chiropractic into the whole back pain, neck pain, headache sort of thing. And then as a result of that, they miss out on much of the amazing benefits of chiropractic. And even people within the chiropractic profession have often said that chiropractic is good for back pain, neck pain, and headache. And that's about it. But that's what our old research used to tell us. The new research that works in the neurology field, the stuff that Heidi Hardwick's doing, or the stuff that Kelly Holt's doing out of New Zealand, and Michael Hall in the US, these guys are looking at the neurology and the neuro impact of chiropractic care, and it's profound. And it tends to work better if it's done more consistently. It tends to work better if it's done more regularly, rather than just ad hoc when you're in pain. So yes, chiropractic is great for headache, great for neck pain, and great for back pain. But there's so many other amazing benefits of chiropractic that we see, and the research is starting to show us why. And it's great because we can communicate it. So in terms of management of stress, chiropractic's part of it. Nutrition's part of it. Exercise is part of it. Meditation's part of it. It's not just one thing only.
Yeah, absolutely. Big fan of chiropractic, and my kids, go for checkups as well with one of your besties, actually, down here in Geelong.
Yeah, DJ.
Yeah.
How's that horrible beard of DJ's? Do you think you should get rid of that?
I was a bit shocked about the wedding. I thought it might go for the wedding, but hang on.
What am I going to do with DJ? But no, he's great. He's one of my greatest mates, and he's a great chiropractor.
Awesome chiropractor. So we've looked at breathing and exercise, and chiropractic. Food's got to come in on that list.
Sure does.
Somewhere.
Sure does.
So how do we think about food when we're looking at stress?
It's fascinating is often when people are tired, they go, oh, I really need a coffee. Yeah. And so let's just think about the mechanism of that for a moment. When you require a coffee to boost your energy, essentially you're calling on your adrenal glands to give you a boost. Yeah. You're not really getting calorific energy driven there. You're actually getting hormone driven energy. That puts you into a fight or flight stress response. And that cascades this whole stress thing that we've just been talking about. So it doesn't matter if it's tea, Coca-Cola, Mountain Dew, M's, what are they? Mothers, what are the other things? Red Bulls, V's, all those sorts of things. Coffee, they've all got caffeine in them, and they all affect the body from a stress perspective. Yeah. It's not a bad thing. It's just that if you're relying on caffeine, then you're relying on your adrenal glands to get you out of a problem. And that's not ideal. You're better off fueling your body with protein, fats, and carbohydrates. And it's interesting, the foods that we crave when we are stressed are generally sweet and oily. So we tend to crave sweet fats. So it might be a donut, or it might be chocolate, or it might be ice cream or something. It could be, for some people that are a bit in tune with their body listening, it could be nuts and seeds, or it might be some peanut butter or something like that. So we're craving oils and sugars because our adrenal glands require those fuels to actually keep us going. And the adrenal glands are, they're amazing little glands that respond to the environment, and we need to nurture them and nourish them. So, fresh food, and I know you've spoken to some great people, Steph Lowe, Cindy O'Meara, some, amazing nutritionists there. And if I was to offer more nutrition advice, as a nutritionist and a naturopath myself, I'd be saying try and get as many plants into your diet as you possibly can. Try and eat good quality proteins with every single meal. Regardless of whether or not it comes from an animal source or a plant-based source, protein's really important. And then select fats that are appropriate. It doesn't have to be saturated fat. For some people, saturated fat might be good. For other people, saturated fat's a godsend. It's really good. It can make you feel fantastic. And particularly if you're a child, you need saturated fat. So with your kids, your girls are a little bit low, they're a little bit flat, and they're, anxious or whatever, then, leave the grizzle on the lamb chop. Or add a little bit of saturated fat to their meal. It could be a bit of butter, or it might be a little bit of coconut oil. It doesn't have to be much. It's just a little bit, maybe a teaspoon or a dessert spoon. And that little boost of calories from fat can be hugely beneficial for them.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so, all right, so we've got breathing, we've got movement. Actually, there was a question that came up in my mind about movement. Well, just to step back a little bit, but you said something about... if if our girls are waking up tired, it might not be that they need more sleep. It might be that they need more movement or exercise.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I often think that when my girls are really tired, I don't want to be pressing them to do more movement because, exercising when you're tired, is that another one of those myths that we're kind of perpetuating?
Yeah, exercise actually creates energy. And so when you do exercise, you're actually calling on a system of energy manufacturing known as the Krebs cycle. And in the Krebs cycle, you burn off carbohydrate and fuel. There's other cycles that you can use, and Steph might have spoken about those because Steph often talks about a higher protein, higher fat, lower carbohydrate style eating. And that involves another cycle of energy production in the body. But Cindy and I would most likely be more talking about the Krebs cycle of energy, and that involves movement. And you actually generate more energy from a process that makes ATP in the body. I kind of lost where I was going, but essentially, exercise generates or stimulates this Krebs cycle, and you're then burning off your carbohydrate fuels, and you're giving your body the opportunity to access the fuel in a way that it can convert it to energy, and you feel brighter. The other thing too that exercise does, or movement does, is it brings more oxygen into the body. If you bring more oxygen into the body and you get more oxygen to the brain, it's a great thing. So sometimes, and this is where exercise can be not great, is when you're exhausted, but you're exhausted as a result of a nutritional insufficiency like iron deficiency. So if you've got iron deficiency or you don't eat enough protein, you'll find that exercise when you're fatigued probably causes damage, and that's not ideal. So it's good for girls to be aware of their cycle, to know whether or not they've got heavy bleeding, or if it's faint or pale in colour. If the colour of the blood is pale, then often that could indicate that there's a insufficiency of iron or blood flow. And so get all those sorts of things checked out, and your nutritionist, your naturopath, your holistic GP can look at those sorts of things for you and find out what's an optimal amount of iron to be in your body and what's an optimal amount of protein to be able to consume, because then you'll benefit from exercise. But generally speaking, if your fatigue is from mental exhaustion, physical exertion is a great way to increase your energy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think iron is definitely one of the ones to look out for. Are there any other sort of symptoms that might alert mums to low iron? What are the
There's quite a few things that you can look out for. So recurrent colds and infections, slow healing, so easy bruising can be an indicator. Generally, you'll find where there's low iron, you'll find that people not only have fatigue when they first wake up, they're fatigued after exercise. So after exertion, they're exhausted, like totally knackered. And that exertion or exercise could just be a walk. Shortness of breath with little bits of exercise can be an iron insufficiency as well. But coupled with iron insufficiency, we often find vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency as well. And so where there's an immune challenge, vitamin D could be implicated. Vitamin C could be implicated. So, kids not eating enough fruit and not eating enough protein could then drive a vitamin C deficiency. We have had issues where there's been scurvy diagnosed in Australia recently, and also rickets. There's a lot of rickets taking place. So bending of the bones, bowing of the rib cage, and that's as a result of vitamin D deficiency or the absence of sun and the absence of fruit in our diet. We're coming out of a crazy phase where people have been scared of eating fruit because it contains sugar.
Yep.
So we've nearly got rid of that, bugbear on our shoulders. Fruit's so good for you. It contains so many nutrients and so many phytochemicals that are just so beneficial for the body. It does have a little bit of sugar, but it's fruit sugar. And there'll be, people out there arguing that that's fructose, but it is fructose, but it's also bound to heaps of nutrition. It's not just fructose like high fructose corn syrup. It's something that's hugely beneficial for the body. It's just not because it's fructose, it's bad.
We love to get on a bandwagon of being really fearful about things. We get fearful about salt, and then we get fearful about sugar, and then we get fearful about the sun and about fruit. And
oh my gosh, saturated fat. Yeah.
Fat. Yeah, that was definitely very scary, fat for years. But maybe, to talk about the sun and getting as much skin exposure to the sun every day is going to be a mind blower for.
It does mind blow a lot of people, particularly people who know people who have had skin cancer. Oh, my sister had melanoma, and you're saying, don't go outside or don't cover up. My thing is that you need an amount of sun that's going to help you generate vitamin D. In the Southern Hemisphere, when we're down here, we don't manufacture a lot of vitamin D from pretty much the middle to the end of March through to the middle, end of October. Yeah. So there's a 6-month period where we don't really manufacture vitamin D from the sun. So the angle of reflection or refraction of the sunlight's coming through to us is not steep enough, like it's not high enough. So we don't manufacture enough vitamin D. It's like all the rays are shielded. So it's good to get out into the sun to trigger the pineal gland, and particularly for countries and regions around the world that suffer from seasonal adaptive disorder, where there's a lack or absence of sunlight hitting the pineal gland. It's good to get outside as often as you can, particularly in that middle part of the year where we don't make a whole lot of vitamin D. The vitamin D indicates that there's infrared light that could damage our skin. But it's interesting, a lot of skin cancers often appear in areas that haven't been exposed to the sun. There's obviously sun-damaged skin like squamous cell carcinomas and basal cell carcinomas. They come from, excessive sun exposure. But the most scary one, which is melanoma, generally appears in areas that is never exposed to the sun. And that's a really interesting thing, like, on the shoulder or on the sole of the foot or in regions or areas that have never seen sunlight. Those areas are often, diagnosed with having melanoma. So it's a fascinating thing. We might find in the future that vitamin D or other vitamins like vitamin K or vitamin C could be more implicated in the development of melanoma. But we're probably going to find sooner rather than later that melanoma is probably not caused by a small amount of sun exposure, like 20 minutes a day. And so 20 minutes a day is about as much sunlight as what you need to generate enough vitamin D at the right times of the year. So from about the end of October through to the end of March, that's the time when we can manufacture lots of vitamin D from the sun. And failing exposure to the sun, then we want to have access to foods that are rich in vitamin D. So cod liver, liver products, dairy products actually do contain vitamin D. And of course, we know that there's some people with issues with dairy products, and some people with a conscious choice not to consume dairy products. But there's some vitamin D in milk, and in cheese and in cream and in yogurt. And that can be of benefit to those people who aren't sensitive to dairy. But if those people are sensitive, then obviously that's not a food source for you.
It's another reason on my list of this evil mother that makes her girls walk to school is that certainly in the morning, that light exposure, that sun, and waking up their hormones and all that stuff, it's all part of that evil plan that I have
to care for your children. Yeah, it's really great, Edwina. It's a really great strategy, and being outside is such a great thing. And it's a real shame that we've got such a fear around the sun, and we've got this campaign where kids have got to wear long sleeve shirts, sun cream up, put a hat on, and spend only short periods of time outside. In their formative years, these are the years that their bones need to grow and develop, that they develop their immune system, and the sun's really important for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame that we have to fill ourselves up with so much fear about all these things, isn't it? Rather than just getting on with living. It's makes life very complicated.
Yeah, and look, not to discredit all the work that's been done in the past. You know, the understanding that sunburn is not good is a good thing. You know, to keep in the back of your mind. You don't want to get burned. It's not ideal to get burned. Burnt causes skin damage.
Yeah.
So, but it is important to get exposure to the sun so that you can actually, you know, trigger not only hormones in the brain but hormones in the skin to protect your skin from the sun, and also to manufacture nutrients like vitamin D.
Mm. So if we tick off everything on our list of helping our girls deal with stress, we talked about breathing, we talked about movement, we talked about food, we talked about
Chiropractic.
chiropractic,
Yep. What else is there?
sleep.
There's sleep. Yeah, we spoke about sleep. We spoke about the position of the tongue in your mouth as to an identification of where things are at. Bowel movements are a really good indicator too. So where your bowels don't move properly. And I don't know about girls and talking about poo. I know Mum and I are
I'm
very
trying
comfortable
to get my
talking about
girls to
poo.
look at their poo, Damian. It's, it's a
They
really
won't do it.
conversation. Oh,
Stop it, Mum. But it's one of those things that's a really important thing to be aware of. You know, if you're moving your bowels, you know, more than twice a day, then you're probably in a bit of state of anxiety or stress. There's a bit too much going on. 3 times a day is probably like the upper limit. If you're at 4, 5, or 6 times a day, then there's something going on. There's other people that don't move their bowels for 1, 2, 3, or 4 or 5 days. And they get really, you know, bung up and caught up. The gastrointestinal system becomes very, very congested and inflated. And that's not ideal for the health of the body either. So it's good to know that your bowels move every 12 to 24 hours. And if you can check that by using corn or sesame seeds, then you know that you're doing the right things. So some people say, oh, I move my bowels every single day. But the reality will be that the food that they ate 2 days ago may not still be out. And so I get people to take a teaspoon of sesame seeds, put into a glass of water, then drink it, and just check to see how long it takes for those seeds to come out. And if those seeds come out within 12 to 24 hours, then the gut's pretty healthy. They're doing all right. But if it's, you know, within 2 hours, that's too quick. If it's 72 hours later, that's too slow.
yes.
So there's an optimal speed, which is 12 to 24 hours.
I'm having flashbacks to seeing you on stage with your fellow partners in crime with women's stockings and food.
Oh, that was the Wellness Summit a couple of years ago. Yeah, with the Wellness Summit, yeah, we spoke about that. We actually did that presentation for the first time. Probably it must have been 6 or 7 years ago for a corporate talk, and we also did it in Adelaide at the comedy festival, the Fringe Festival over there. So we wanted to show people what actually happens when you eat food, and what you're putting in there and how it digests, and then, you know, what actually ends up coming out. It's kind of not ideal. Yeah.
It's a great visual. It works.
It's stuck in your brain forever. It's there, Edwina. I love it.
It's great. Look, I think this is just, you know, we've covered so much, and I think that just gives people a wealth of information to think about. I know people will want to tap into more from you, Damian. So where's the best place for people to do that?
I love interacting with people, Edwina. So if people want to go to my Facebook, you can check me out on Facebook. If you search Damian Kristof, there's a public page there that you can get access to, and I post lots of things up on that. Generally, I don't friend people that I don't know on Facebook, but if you like my page, you can see it. But if you go to my website, I've got heaps of resources there. Recently just did a video series on allergies and managing hay fever, and the science and the work that's coming out of the Murdoch Institute here in Melbourne at the Royal Children's, and there's some profound stuff happening with peanut allergy and hay fever, eczema, dermatitis, asthma, all those sorts of things. So I did that recently, and that's on my website. I've got other videos on my website that people can get access to, and of course forage. You know, forage, what a great thing to have for breakfast to decrease your stress.
Yep.
And so you can, you know, eat forage cereal for breakfast and do really well with that.
Yep.
That's a nutritionally balanced, gluten-free breakfast muesli range.
Perfect. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. I've just loved this interview, and I know that everybody's just going to get so much from it. So many thanks.
Thanks, Edwina. Thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, no problem. Bye for now.
See ya.